Okay, this is module 2.3. We're continuing on presentation skills and activities on this. So some common problems, and I will be the first to admit that I do ums and other unrelated words. When you're doing that, all you're doing is you're buying yourself time to think about what the next thing you're going to say is. That's what causes those. So the more you practice, the more you can minimize that or eliminate those types of activities or unrelated words or phrases. So that's something to think about. Don't be pacing. Earlier, I said in the last slide deck, I said I walk around in a room. That's my way of making eye contact with the audience. There's nothing wrong with that. It's different if you're pacing back and forth as opposed to a slight walk where you're having the opportunity to engage with the different groups that you're walking or talking to. Don't be fidgeting, hands in your pockets. I've seen folks do that, and just it designates a high level of anxiety and nervousness, and you want to avoid that. Again, as I said through this whole couple of videos, you want to make the audience feel like you're very comfortable and you're happy to be there. And that's the intent for why we walk through some of these things and why you practice. What's the number one fear when you're giving a presentation? And everybody has it, okay, is that you're afraid you're going to embarrass yourself in front of the group. You're gonna be blushing. You're gonna have memory loss. All those are normal. Those are all normal, but they all relate to the fear or the causes of anxiety, that you lose control. You may not know an answer. The audience may not like you. They may not understand or buy into what you're saying. Okay, so you need to be able to be positive, think on your feet, and be progressive and have it well thought out and practice the information that you're presenting. So that way you can eliminate a lot of those. Some of them you're not going to eliminate. Okay, but the audience will read through that. The trainee group will read through whatever anxiety you have. They will see that. So the more that you can minimize and eliminate, the better off you are. The key way of doing that is through practice. How to prepare and use notes. A lot of people, I am extremely envious of some individuals that do not use notes, that have that kind of memory. But you would be surprised as to the folks that you have that you think aren't using notes really are using notes. There was an individual that I had met one time who was an outstanding presenter, and he did it all the time, but he brought a notebook with him. But his notebook had his outline, and he had to wear glasses, and so the words on the pages was an inch high, so that there would be no question as to what was next in the process. So rather than using cards, he had the notebook, but everything was very large print. So it was easy for him to follow along and not lose the where he was. You don't want to play around or putz with your cards or your papers, because that will be a distraction. You have to build a methodology where you can move them as you're speaking and do it seamlessly. There are some folks, and I've got it down here, that say don't use a ring binder or a pad. Definitely not a pad, but don't use a ring binder. I happen to think that a pad is very appropriate to be able to use rather than cards if you're at a podium. Now, if you're not at a podium where it's not obvious, then the cards are much better. But there are ways of going through to do that. These are the top 10 pointers. And the biggest one in my mind is to make sure that you have them numbered in the order they're in, and that they're large, printed on large format or large font. or written out that way. The other component is you memorize the opening of your presentation and you memorize the end of your presentation. Now you can, because you don't, they're not there to hear you read. They're there to hear your presentation. Okay. But by not having to look down at your cards during the opening, that gives them a level of comfort that you really know what you're doing. And that gives you more credibility. Okay. And so that's important. And why, in the same regard, by at the end of your presentation, when you're doing your closing, or you're not looking down at your cards, or the paper that you got your outline on, they know that you know the material. So that's a key component in that regard. Have set standards. Have a format that you do all of your presentations in terms of how your cards are designed, that you go through, and so you know the right. It's not necessarily the materials are the same, but the methodology is the same. So think about that in terms of how you do that. When you're doing your presentation, provide an overview. What's the goals and rationale? If you're checking prior knowledge, you can read the things on the slide. So there's a lot of different components from best practices that you can go through to help yourself get the participants to the closure spot. This is the best one I think is great. When the 5 most important presentations is smile, breathe. You cannot give a presentation if you're not breathing. Okay. If you have water, take water, but if you don't have water, that's fine. Have your notes lined up and finish on time or under time. And I've said this multiple times, you need to finish a couple minutes ahead of when you said that the format would be, just because that adds credibility to what you're going through, and people will accept that better. So think about that. Oops, wrong one, sorry. And the key component that we started with, that we said to start with, is that peak performers, they're not born, they're made through practice. They're not super human. They're just average people like you and me, but they practice a lot. They've gone through that. They're not workaholics. Okay, they're committed to results, and they have the ability to communicate because they've done a lot of practice. So you need to think about how those all fit together in this process. Now, what's going to happen is over the next 12, 13 weeks, you're going to be giving a variety of presentations. Think about what we've just gone through as to how those presentations fit and what your individual presentation style is. Okay, do you want to use the note cards? Do you want to use notebooks for references? Do you want to use project presenter where you have your notes on each slide? Are you going to use slides? So there's a wealth of things for you to think about that will work through and make life better for you and easier. And you will become more comfortable as you go. What you're going to see is we've got presentations that are 2 to 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, all the way to the end. And at the end of the semester, it'll be a group presentation. It'll be like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So you're building blocks. Every time you're giving a presentation, you're doing more building on how to go through and do that. Okay. This is the end for this week of the slide deck. Have a great week, and we will see you next week.